Even Chinese companies, which are not directly affected by these sanctions, have announced that they are perhaps pulling back now from their energy dealings with Russia. John, you want a number? 3 million barrels of oil a day? That's a significant amount of oil that the world needs. And we are curtailing those shipments that Russia is sending out.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, without oil revenue, this war ends very quickly because Putin can't pay for it.
Now let's talk about the new American sanctions on Russian oil companies. First, direct intervention the Trump administration has made over the Russian invasion of Ukraine. President Trump explained why he's acting now.
These are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies. And we hope that they won't be on for long. We hope that the war will be settled. We would like to see them just take the line that has been formed over quite a long period of time and go and let's, go home. Last week they had almost 8,000 soldiers killed. Many Russians were killed last week. Many Ukrainians were killed last week. We think it's ridiculous and would like to have it end.
Why do you think he wants peace, though? Why do you still believe that?
I think they want peace. I think they both want peace at this point.
Well, Donald Trump there. Now, Rosneft and Lukoil account for nearly half Russia's total crude oil exports, with the two corporations exporting 3.1 million barrels a day. George Grills is here on the line, the US correspondent for The Times. Hello to you, George.
Good morning.
So, George, good to have you here. So it looks finally like tough action against Russia. President Trump responding after what was a very public rebuff.
Yeah, and this had been brewing for a few days. So you'll remember there was the call with Putin first last week. Then there was the meeting in the Oval Office with Zelensky. And at the end of that, basically, Trump kind of came back to this position that there needed to be a ceasefire along the current front line. So basically, the fighting needed to stop where it was now. There was not going to be any kind of horse trading of territory. And he was kind of looking forward to this meeting in Budapest with Putin, where this was all going to be hammered out. But then there was a real breakdown in relations at the beginning of the week when Marco Rubio had a call with Sergei Lavrov. And basically, there was no sign of any progress as far as the Americans were concerned. They were saying that the Russians weren't budging from their kind of insistence that, for example, the Donbass was entirely surrendered to Russia. And as a result, Trump appears to basically have lost patience, and that's what's caused these sanctions.
Right, and I'm going to be talking a bit later on the real impact this measure may have. But meanwhile, there is, isn't there, George, in the US Congress, in a cabinet, as it were, legislation on secondary sanctions against those countries buying Russian oil, which would be much tougher.
Yeah, the whole aim of what Trump is trying to do is isolate Russia from the rest of the world's economy, and in particular from China and India, who have basically compensated for Europe stopping buying Russian oil and gas after the invasion of Ukraine by purchasing large quantities of it. And there are already signs that these sanctions are starting to work, because basically companies in India and China face a choice. Do they want to have access to US financial institutions, to the dollar, or do they want cheap Russian oil? And there are already signs that they're starting to think, have second thoughts about continuing to import this Russian oil, because it will have huge economic consequences for them.
Right. Now, obviously, there's more that the White House could do. Tomahawk cruise missiles, they were being discussed up until a few days ago. Donald Trump backed away from the idea of helping Ukraine get hold of those. Could that come back onto the table?
I doubt it. His tone was pretty negative on that yesterday. He was saying, for example, that it would take 6 months to a year to train the Ukrainians how to fire them. If you will recall, if you have as long a memory as I do on the Ukraine conflict, you'll remember Joe Biden making a similar argument about jets back in the day, and how it would take forever for the Ukrainians to learn how to fly F-16. So it's an excuse we've seen before from Western countries who are kind of reluctant to give aid and powerful weapons to Ukraine. But the tone very much is not that Trump is in a place where he's willing to give tomahawks to Ukraine.
George Grills, thank you. George Grills there, US correspondent for The Times. And now I can say hello to Peter Doran, who's a Russian economic expert and also senior fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Hello to you, Peter.
Hello, John. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Peter, can you just first of all just tell us a bit about what these sanctions set down now, laid out by President Trump, what will they actually do?
Well, this is the moment we have all been waiting for, John. This is the moment that analysts like myself and others have been pushing for. It is when the United States drops the hammer of economic power where it is needed most, directly onto the Russian oil economy. John, think about this. There are essentially two channels that Putin needs to keep open. One is his export channel for oil, and the other is the money channel of payments coming back into his economy, into his war chest. By dropping the hammer of these sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, the U.S. Treasury has not only said, we are going to attack that weak point in your economy, but here's the twist. They're also sending down the avenue a whiff of grape shot at the bankers who do business with these companies, at the banks that facilitate these financial transactions. Buried in Treasury's announcement yesterday was a very important line. It said the Treasury stands ready to apply secondary sanctions on international banking systems who facilitate these transactions. This is big, and it is welcomed and needed right now.
Right, now I'm wondering, how big a hole will this make in the Russian economy? Now, we know these two companies that are being hit by sanctions, they account for a very large part of the Russian oil industry. We'll hear the conversation later. I was talking to a Russian legislator, and he was saying, look, the share of the Russian economy taken up by oil and energy has fallen very significantly. Is that bravado?
Well, it certainly has, because we have been slowly curtailing and containing Russia's energy exports. But look at just what happened in China. Even Chinese companies, which are not directly affected by these sanctions, have announced that they are perhaps pulling back now from their energy dealings with Russia. John, you want a number? 3 million barrels of oil a day? That's a significant amount of oil that the world needs. And we are curtailing those shipments that Russia is sending out.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, without oil revenue, this war ends very quickly because Putin can't pay for it. That's what Treasury has done.
Right. And are there workarounds for Russia? I mean, they have been selling a lot of oil to China. That's been taking up some of the space that was occupied by the European market. And we saw India, of course, was buying cheap from Russia and selling it dear, which has obviously put more of the squeeze on. But how much will these sanctions really hurt?
Well, most of the oil that goes to China goes through pipelines. Those are hard to attack without physical force or intervention. All right, let's set China off the table. The shadow fleet, that's the oil Russia sends out over the water. Well, their shadow fleet, illegal tankers plying the world's oceans, that is the next big weak point. Here's the thing, John. The United States, along with its NATO allies, has the ability under international law to board, inspect, and seize these illegal tankers plying the world's oceans, especially as they leave the Baltic Sea filled with oil. If they are playing games with their paperwork, if they are flying false flags off the back of these vessels, that's illegal, and we can seize them. That's going to be the next point of weakness we should attack in order to prevent sanctions evasion. So there's the sanctions enforcement side and the evasion side on the other. Both sides are important. Treasury has taken an important step with the announcement yesterday.
All right, Peter Doran from the Foundation for Defence of Democracies, thank you so much.